Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live session on the topic of generative artificial intelligence, or GenAI for short. Just to introduce myself, my name's Lauren, and I work for Vanson Bourne, who are an independent specialist in market research for the technology sector. And I worked alongside the Thoughtworks team, acting as the lead researcher on this project that we're going to explore the results for in more detail today. Thoughtworks spoke to 10,000 consumers about their feelings towards GenAI and what they want and expect from businesses that are using it. So in this session today, we'll be chatting a bit about GenAI and what your customers want. We'll explore their feelings towards the technology and attitude to engage with businesses that are using GenAI. We'll also look at the concerns they have and our advice around how to address those concerns. So enough from me, let's meet our experts joining us today. So I'm really excited to introduce you to our two main speakers. So we've got Mike Mason, who is the Chief AI Officer at Thoughtworks. And Thoughtworks are a global technology consultancy that integrates strategy, design, and engineering to drive digital innovation. And we've also got Ramak, who is the AI Transparency Research Lead at the Mozilla Foundation. So thank you both so much for joining us today. To get started, it would be great if you could both introduce yourselves and explain a bit about what you do. So Ramak, if we could start with you, please.
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, sure. I'm a digital rights advocate based in Berlin, and I'm also a multidisciplinary researcher. And my work is about the sustainable and beneficial development and implementation and governance of emerging technologies for the benefit of the majority of the people. And I have focused on responsible AI for the last 5 years.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ramak. And it's a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you. And Mike, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Mike Mason. I'm the Chief AI Officer at Thoughtworks. And what that means right now is that my job is to accelerate the adoption of generative AI across our business and the work that we do for clients, and really make sure that we're moving fast enough on this new and pretty exciting technology.
Brilliant. Thank you both. Okay, so let's dig into the results then and what we found from this research project. So Mike, if we could stick with you, it'd be great if you could tell the audience today why Thoughtworks wanted to know more about consumer attitudes to GenAI and what you felt some of the most surprising findings were.
So there's a ton of hype in the industry right now around generative AI, but often not a lot of information to guide businesses on what their customers want. So there's lots about the technology and what you might do with it, but there's less around how that impacts customers. And we actually found some pretty big numbers in the report. If you do research, it's always nice to find some strong findings, and we think there are some strong findings here. For example, 93% of consumers believe that businesses would face an impact if they didn't incorporate responsible and ethical thinking in their use of generative AI. We found that there are opportunities to use generative AI in a positive way for businesses, and we think that the research shows that there's appetite for consumers to use business services that include AI, but that folks really need to understand that there are important safety guardrails that should be in place, and we'll talk about some of those there. A few kind of key themes. Consumers are very aware of generative AI. Excitement levels are high, depending on the country. We found quite some differences between each of the countries that we looked at. With some countries, notably India, actually, having more than 90% of people who were very excited about the possibilities of AI. Another big finding that we had was that more than 90% of people think that government regulation is going to be required to hold businesses accountable for how they use generative AI. But at the same time, 56% of people don't actually trust businesses to conform to those government guidelines. And that produces a real kind of dichotomy in the results that businesses need to understand and to think about. So I think the conclusion is that there is concern and a definite lack of trust on the behalf of consumers in businesses. And so there's an opportunity for businesses to do the right thing here and use this technology ethically and responsibly.
Definitely. And I completely agree. I think that lack of trust is coming through from the results that you've mentioned. And clearly they want some reassurances around that based on what it's showing us. So one thing I wanted to touch upon that you've mentioned, Mike, is the idea of responsible and ethical technology. And I think that's an ideal opportunity for us to pass on to Ramak now. It would be great if you could tell us a bit about your role at Mozilla and some of the work that you've been doing around ethical AI that touches upon that responsible and ethical technology element that Mike mentioned.
Sure. So I'm leading Mozilla's research on meaningful AI transparency. And what does it mean? Transparency is at the core of responsible AI. It's pretty much the precondition for everything around accountability and accuracy, safety of the systems, privacy, and so on. So we wanted to understand the attitudes and the motivations of AI developers and deployers of AI towards transparency. And we have a lot of tools and features that were discovered and featured the last years in research especially. And we wanted to see how much or how far is the implementation and how is the experience of the builders with it. So we found out that there is a little effort to implement the tools. And we asked for the motivations of those who are trying to bring transparency into the AI systems that they use. And the highest ranking and motivations was to optimize the systems. Of course, it's not very surprising to bring a higher level of accuracy. But I give you the other end of the motivation. So 90% of respondents ranked ethical considerations 11 on the 12-point scale. And meeting legal requirements was the lowest ranked motivator. So this is really interesting that your findings are mirroring what we found out some months before. And when the consumers feel that they don't trust the implementation, they just follow the science, obviously. And we also asked the builders to map for us the challenges that they face while trying to implement transparency, because it's really not easy. One of the areas of challenge was the tools that are out there. One of them is model cards that everybody knows, or data sheets for data sets, but also more technical tools to try to make the systems more less biased. So they found that there is a lack of fitting tools, that they don't have enough resources, and that they don't really understand or trust the outcomes of these transparency tools. Another one was, interestingly, a perceived lack of regulation. And therefore, they don't feel the pressure from outside. They also don't see a public interest. So maybe this study will change this. They don't have a felt pressure from outside. And we know that we have already lots of regulation that applies to AI, copyright laws, privacy, competition laws, and the AI Act and other regulation worldwide is coming. We have already some in China and other countries who already have very strict AI regulation, or we have now recommender systems that are regulated by DSA. So, but they are not affecting small businesses. Then we have the ethical part. We saw that there is a lack of intrinsic motivation, and partly because the topic of responsible AI is still not part of STEM education. And another interesting finding that I want to share with you is that many developers told us that they lack buy-in from the C-level, and they just don't have any business incentives to take their time and to dedicate it to transparency.
Wow, thank you, Ramak. That's really interesting. And yeah, some of the points you make definitely align to the results of this research as well. And I think one thing we found from the Thoughtworks piece as well is around consumers being skeptical of businesses' ability to self-regulate. So on that, it would be great to dig a little deeper into that. And Mike, coming back to you now, So it would be great if you could talk about the concerns that consumers have that could impact their buying decisions and the damage that that could have to businesses' reputation if they don't get it right. And yeah, were there any results related to that, and what were your thoughts on any that were?
Sure. So there is some good news that more than nearly half, 42% of respondents said they would be more likely to buy from a business that uses generative AI, as they felt it would make the business and the products that they were using more innovative. So there is some positivity here, but the concerns, the number one concern that we found was around data and privacy. So lots of people concerned about identity theft. So 85% of people worried about that. I would be worried too. I am worried, actually, frankly. Some of the voice cloning stuff we've seen is quite concerning in the technology, and I think everyone's going to have to move fast to keep up with that. I think people do perceive the lack of regulation in this space. I mean, even as Ramak was saying, even developers who are working with this stuff feel that there's a lack of regulation, even when that's not actually true. We have much more basic laws in place around what you can and can't do. Definitely, we saw people concerned about cyber attacks and breaches, data breaches, that kind of thing, and also softer concerns, around the lack of a human touch. One of the proposed pieces of AI regulation is actually to make it very clear when a human is interacting with an AI, as opposed to interacting with actually a person, because these systems may get good enough that it's actually hard to tell the difference sometimes. And then lots of concern from people around bias. I think people have kind of keyed into that. This is not the first time that bias in data has been important. I think ever since the big data revolution has come about, bias in data has been an important topic, but it's even more important for AI systems because they learn based on that training data. So if you have explicit or accidental bias in that training data, then the AI system is going to basically mimic that bias. And we actually even see some of that in even very strong commercial AI that's deployed today. I'm not going to name any systems here, but you can actually ask them questions that do reveal kind of some intrinsic bias in the data sets that we use to train them. So one of the other big numbers that we found in our survey is that 87% of respondents said they favor businesses that proactively communicate how they're ensuring ethical risks of GenAI are being evaluated. And I think that comes back to Ramak's point around transparency being so critical. We think it's important for businesses to foster trust in their customers by being transparent and open about what they're doing.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think that transparency element has come out strongly in the results as well. And Ramak, I don't know if you want to add anything to what Mike's just said as well there.
Yeah, absolutely true. I just one point, and when businesses provide transparency, like for example on the Lion data set, right? It's an open data set. Then also people observe some infringement of copyright, and then they start court lawsuits. So this is also a point why some industries are hesitant with the transparency, but it's needed anyway.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, that 87% stat that you mentioned, Mike, around, consumers favoring businesses that are proactive in showing the ethical risks of GenAI. And Ramak, I know you've got a lot of work in the space of AI transparency. So it would be great if you could explain to the audience some of your insights into the challenges when it comes to AI transparency and what AI transparency actually should include.
For transparency to be truly effective, it needs to provide the right amount of information in a format that meets the specific transparency needs of different stakeholders. This is what makes it really challenging. And it's about linking the information to its role in a particular context and adapting it for different audiences. So therefore, the notion of meaningful transparency, it's the concept that we develop, has two key aspects. The first one is a thematic dimension. It's about the information type shared. So that includes everything from acknowledging that AI is in use in the first place. Many people don't even know that there is AI in use for specific decisions. Then the disclosing the data sources, the training data, the fine-tuning data. Then the steps that were taken to reduce bias, the performance of the system, of course, the accuracy of the system, then information, and this is also very important, about the optimization metrics used in the system. Very specifically, also the explainability of the black box models, like how trying to trace how a specific output came from a specific input. So trying to understand the reasoning of the AI. But it also includes broader societal aspects of how the impacts are, how the working conditions are, for example, for data workers, like data annotators. And this also includes information about ecological footprint, water and energy consumptions, information like that. This was the first dimension. The second dimension is a functional one. So transparency is only a means to an end. It's not the goal. The goal is to improve the use of the system by the domain experts. They can be the clients, paying clients. The goal is to assign liability to a responsible person or entity. It's to achieve robustness and safety of AI systems. It's to check whether your rights are affected. And also it's, the goal is to preserve the autonomy of the humans in the whole process of using AI, so that their skills are augmented and not replaced. So all of these is relevant for the notion of meaningful AI. And at the moment, we face a clear lack of transparency. There's a recent study from Stanford University. It's called the Foundation Model Transparency Index. And it looked at the top 10 generative AI models and found out that the best score was 60%. And this was from Meta's Llama and from Hugging Face Bloom. And but alarmingly, none of the 10 providers share information about potential impact of their systems. So there is really a long way to go. And with the lack of timely and effective regulation and law enforcement, we really need developers and industry to act more responsibly while deploying AI.
Thank you, Ramak. Yeah, that's really insightful. And it sounds like there's a lot of work still to go in that space as well to get to where we need to be. So thinking of transparency, as we've just discussed, responsible and ethical AI, and also building trust with customers as well. I think for everyone listening, it would be useful to know how business leaders can address these concerns. So Ramak, if we could start with you, if you could perhaps give 2 or 3 recommendations, what are the top 3 that you would give to the audience today in terms of how to address the concerns we've discussed?
Yeah, sure. So to avoid the same mistake as with the GDPR, I would say my first recommendation is prepare for the AI Act and other upcoming regulation and start early. So don't underestimate the 2 to 3 years. Make it a project, prioritize it, and give the backing from the C-level. This would be my first recommendation, I guess. Then I would say this is, at least from my point of view, from the challenges that I see, my recommendation would be to challenge the hype, At the moment, the social and environmental costs of GenAI are really high and the compliance costs are rising. So resist the use of generative AI, sorry for that, Mike, for any kind of purposes where you don't need it. So really look at the use cases and see where you really need generative AI. Otherwise, you can use data processing, reinforcement learning, or just hiring human experts. And then you would also have more of the human interaction and human touch that customers are asking for, or just optimizing a product. That sometimes would be the better option than to use generative AI to solve a problem that can be solved differently. So, and also you would benefit for having more control about the technology that you are using, because with Gen AI, you have limited control of what it's doing. And maybe my last recommendation would be to prioritize ethical considerations and to bridge this gap between customer expectations and company culture. Invest time in documentation and transparency delivery. It's hard, but it's worth it, because you will also have better data sets, higher quality data sets. You will have higher accuracy, so it's good also for the business itself. And don't hire only machine learning experts, but also experts in the social technical impact of the tools that you are producing and putting out in the world. And of course, for some guidance, do read our report.
Definitely, yeah. And I'll come on to that as well, particularly the Thoughtworks side report. But before we come on to that, Mike, what are your top 3 recommendations for businesses?
So I think the first one is kind of a little bit like what Ramak was saying, like really understand that there's an opportunity here as a business to be proactive about doing the right thing here, disclosing your use of AI, adhering to responsible tech principles, and really doing the right thing, because the consumers are thinking about this, and they are, even if regulation isn't here yet, consumers are evaluating what you do. And so doing the right thing is going to set you up right. And as Ramak mentioned, the regulation is coming. As we saw with GDPR, once Europe moved on something, there are lots of global companies that suddenly have to pay attention to that, even if maybe there aren't regulations in place the rest of the way around the world. I think Ramak also mentioned that governance, robust governance processes are really important here. To me, part of this AI revolution is kind of a continuation of what we've been seeing in data. So one of the things that Thoughtworks helps our clients with is to build a strong data strategy and data platform, including data governance, provenance techniques, all of that stuff. And I think I would actually echo what Ramak said about not just hitting every problem with the generative AI hammer, right? Gen AI is fantastic because everybody now wants to have a conversation about AI, which is great. And actually, a lot of those conversations don't necessarily end up in needing to implement a generative AI solution. It might be a more traditional AI solution, or just doing the right thing. But what's great here is that people's imaginations have been opened up again, I think, to what they can do with data. And that's the really exciting thing. And often, yes, there's a generative AI component to that. But that's one of the things that I'm really excited about. And I think businesses should be using this opportunity to reevaluate what they're doing with data.
Fantastic. Thank you both. And just an additional recommendation from me around the report that has been created off the back of this really interesting research piece. Please do go to thoughtworks.com to read that. It's very insightful, and it covers many of the points that we've discussed today. And I think that will be added to the comments of the event chat as well. So just to summarize really, Mike and Ramak, what you've spoken about today, and some of the stats that you mentioned, Mike. So the 42% stat you mentioned around consumers being more likely to buy from businesses using Gen AI, and the 80% that think it can make companies be more innovative. The results are clearly showing a positive interpretation towards Gen AI. Consumers recognize the benefits of it. They recognize the innovation and competitive edge that it can provide to businesses. But it goes without saying that's not without some of the concerns and barriers that we've discussed today that we saw from the results. So the 90% that say regulations are necessary to hold businesses accountable, but then also the 56% who said actually they don't trust businesses to follow regulations. So, although they're demanding regulation, actually do they have trust that businesses are following it? And I think that's one of the key stats that really shows how important it is for businesses to build that trust and reassurance among their customers. And then the final stat I just wanted to mention was the 93% stat. That big stat that consumers are saying that businesses would face impacts if they didn't incorporate responsible and ethical thinking when using GenAI. And I think that's a real eye-opener stat. And I think it shows that these results can't be ignored. Consumers recognize that businesses would face impacts from not doing that. So making sure that they're being transparent and taking all of the necessary steps that Mike and Ramak, you've mentioned today, are really essential to provide that reassurance. So in summary, we saw that there's consumer appetite for GenAI. They recognize the benefits, but transparency and being proactive is key, as well as keeping up with those regulatory developments. So unless Michael, Ramak, you have anything else to add? No, I think we can
it's been a great conversation.
Here. It's been fantastic, really insightful. And I hope everyone who has joined today has found it useful and has taken something away from this as well. So yeah, we'll conclude it there then. And please do read that report as well if you get a chance. And thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks, Mike and Ramak, again.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.